Welcome to the continued introduction at educator.com for standardized tests when it comes to reading. For this lesson, I'm going to be going over for you some short reading questions and how to approach them and how to answer them and how to get the right answer. So the lesson overview is going to go like this. What kinds of passages will you read? And secondly, what types of questions will you be asked? And then what should you look for when you skim? And then we'll go over some exercises together. What kind of passages will you read? Well, there's typically four that test makers will choose from. They'll give you all kinds of science ones. And these are typically the hard sciences like physics, chemistry, astronomy. They tend to not emphasize psychology or sociology or more soft sciences, as they're so called. The other subject is called the humanities. I'll go over what the humanities are after I cover social sciences and narrative. Social sciences are, of course, history, social studies, maybe a little bit of economics, or possibly something that would look like anthropology. And the narratives are going to be your short stories. So this just leaves this kind of vague category called the humanities. Well, humanities might be something like you're reading a short speech that somebody has given. That's probably about the most common way that you could see it. Or maybe you're getting a very, very specific biographical information on a historical figure. That's kind of social sciences, but that could also be considered humanities. Humanities is kind of broad, and then it covers a lot of subjects. Probably the easiest ones to get are probably the social sciences and the humanities ones. Science and narratives tend to be a little bit more difficult, but I guess it all depends on the kind of reader you are. Now, what type of questions will you be asked when it comes to the multiple choice questions? Well, they kind of fall into several little archetypes. Some questions might be what are called big picture questions. So you read a whole passage and then you're asked, well, what is the author's main point? What is the author's main message? And then you have 5 different answers to choose from. You might be asked about the author's point of view or the author's rhetorical purpose. So let's say that you've just read a passage all about human rights or something, and the author will have a specific opinion on a human rights issue in the city or the country of Burma. And then you're asked, what is the writer's point of view on this issue? And then you'll give 5 different answers. Rhetorical purpose is similar to the author's point of view. They'll be giving you a single line or a single sentence, and they'll ask, why did the author put this into the essay? Little picture questions will be asking you about the minor details and the major supporting details of a particular passage. Those should probably jump right out at you if you're used to 5-paragraph essays. Vocab in context questions are where you use the skills from the very beginning of this course to figure out what this word means and how the author is using it. The very last ones are typically the ones where it's testing your critical thinking ability, and you got to make an inference. This is kind of where you read everything all at once, and you figure out something else about the author, or you figure something else about the author, and then you have to infer what might come next. So, general tips covered once again. Even on these short passages, concentrate more on skimming than scanning. Most importantly, you must find that topic. Look for those repeated words. Look for those repeated concepts. Find the keywords that tell you that the topic is coming. Likewise, when you're watching for these keywords, don't forget to highlight major supporting details or minor supporting details or anything that's happening there. The other important thing you have to watch out for is find the author's proposition and his supporting reasons. This is especially important when you're reading a science one or a social sciences one. Remember, a proposition is something that can be true or false. It's a claim of judgment that the author is making, and he's going to give you some reasons why you should accept it too. No, not everything you read is going to have a proposition, but as soon as you see it, make sure you underline it and you understand it. Now, let's go over some quick examples. Breeding animals in captivity has become a major mission for many zoos. At first, zoos bred animals in captivity to keep the zoo populated for animals. However, now it has become an insurance policy for severely endangered animals. Captivity breeding helped save the California condor. Yet, we must go one step further to save animals. Does that sound like a proposition? If we breed animals in captivity, we will only save tame, domestic, rather soulless versions of the animals. To save endangered species, we must protect their environments. Where else will we release them once we breed them in zoos? All right, so I have actually scanned this for you, but notice that I have kind of also skimmed it and highlighted important parts. There's a very important keyword here, yet. Now, what kind of keyword was yet? Well, that's a contrast. So that means that we're going to talk about something very different than just breeding animals in captivity. We're also going to be talking about something important. So, keep all this in mind, and let's go to the questions. What is the overall subject of the reading passage? Well, think about this. When we're doing topics, we like to highlight, and we like to highlight repeated words, and that usually gives us a hint of the topic. How many times did the California condor come up? Only once. So I'm actually going to cross that out, because I don't think that could possibly be the topic. Now, what did come up frequently? Well, zoos did come up pretty frequently, but also this idea of captivity breeding. Now, the question is, why was zoos mentioned? Well, I think zoos was mentioned only because it's where captivity breeding happens. Captivity breeding was mentioned more and more, and we were still talking about it at the very end of the lecture. There was a rhetorical question that mentioned zoos, but it tended to emphasize captivity breeding over and over again. So, with that, we have only two options left. If I was just guessing, I would now have a 50-50 chance of getting this right instead of a 1 in 4. So, captivity breeding and habitat protection, or captivity breeding as an alternative to habitat protection are my two options here. Now, did this author think that captivity breeding was bad? No. The author thought that captivity breeding was not enough. And if you go back and you look at that passage carefully, you'll notice that the author said that captivity breeding, we need more, but they didn't say captivity breeding was bad. They did talk about how it saved the California condor. So I'm going to cross out D, and our correct answer is C. Question number 2. The author mentions a California condor because... This type of question is a rhetorical purpose question. It's seeing, do you understand why the author mentioned this particular California condor? So here are the options. First off, to introduce the topic of the essay. Well, what was the topic of the essay? It was a captivity breeding. And how was captivity breeding mentioned? Well, they were talking about zoos. If the California condor was to introduce a topic, I would have expected the California condor to be mentioned in the first sentence or the second sentence, but not in the third or fourth where it actually landed in that little essay. So maybe we're also talking about this, to show one popular attraction at the zoo. This essay's subject was not zoos. This essay's subject was captivity breeding. We're not talking about zoos and why you should go to the zoos. I have just eliminated 2 obvious wrong answers. So let's talk about which one could be the correct answer. To argue that zoos are needed for the protection of bird species, or to illustrate one species that has survived because of captivity breeding. Go back and look at the actual reading a few slides ago, and you'll see that it's actually this answer right here. The purpose of the California condor was a minor supporting detail to support the major supporting detail that captivity breeding has helped save endangered species. It was their insurance policy, remember? Next example. One of the biggest problems in the American political system is how we view the Constitution. Both parties, left and right, view the document. What does the document refer to? The Constitution, as a sacred static text which should never be altered. Contrary to that, our Constitution was meant to be a fluid document that could be adjusted over time. One reason, what does reason? What is that key word? Is that the Founding Fathers were never in universal agreement. And I'm going to skip this next sentence because I'm skimming. Secondly, the more extreme founders believed that the Constitution should be torn up and recreated every 4 years. What is this author's proposition? Let's find it. Our Constitution was a fluid document that could be adjusted over time. And I got one reason right here, and I got a second reason right here. It's only two. Maybe he could have given us three, but we got two right here. So, what am I going to do for the next questions? Let's take a look at them. Question number 1. A good synonym for fluid in this passage would be, this is a vocab in context question. It wants you to know not just what fluid means, but how the author is using the word fluid. So let's look at the reading passage down here, and we'll find out what fluid means. Contrary to this, our Constitution was meant to be a fluid document that could be adjusted over time. Okay, contrary is a contrast keyword. Contrary to what? That the Constitution was a static text that should never be altered. Altered. What's the opposite of altered? Well, think about that for a second. If this was a blank word here, what would it be? Let's eliminate an intuitive yet completely silly answer. One synonym for fluid is something like liquid. But do you want the Constitution to be made out of water? Well, no, it still needs to be a written document. So let's cross out liquid. That's silly. We have the word static here as an option. But notice this. We have static text, and then we have contrary. So we know that this is a contrast keyword. Whatever this author is claiming, he does not want it to be static. So I'm going to cross that out too. Then we have two words here. We have immutable and changeable. There's a good chance here you probably only know maybe what one of these words means. You probably only know that changeable can be changed. Well, it turns out that is the correct answer. Is right there. Changeable is what we mean by fluid here. Why isn't immutable the correct answer? Well, immutable means not mutable. Mutable is to change. So, immutable is a good synonym for the word static or unchangeable, but changeable is our correct answer. Question number 2. The writer most likely believes. This is one of those tricky inference questions. I'm not going to be able to go to a line in the passage and find this answer. But if I use my critical thinking skills, I could probably figure out what this author wants. Number 1, we should keep the Constitution the way it is. What was the author's proposition? Well, that the Constitution is a fluid document that could be altered over time. Fluid meant changeable. So I don't think that this author wants that. That we should make small adjustments to the Constitution. Well, since I understand the author's proposition, I can maybe think that this might be the right one, and I'm going to put a question mark by that. I'm going to go over the other options just to be sure. We should follow the Constitution exactly as the founders intended. What did this author think about the founders? Well, he thought that they weren't always in agreement, and they're no different than modern-day politicians. Not that great either. We should tear up and recreate the Constitution. Now, he did cite one of the founders as saying that and having those opinions. But let's think carefully here. What was the author's opinion of the founders who thought that we should do that? He described them as more extreme. And when somebody says that person is more extreme or very extreme, they usually don't agree with that person 100%. So I think that the best inference is B. We should make small adjustments to the Constitution. Final example for our short answers. One of the most legendary heroes of the ancient world was Socrates. We know his legend through his student Plato. Socrates was called the wisest man of all in Athens because he knew he did not know. That's a place. I'm going to highlight that. For example, keyword, Socrates would ask a judge what justice was, and a pious clergyman what piety was. Socrates, however, contrast keyword, made enemies as his questions upset those around him. He was condemned by citizens of Athens to die. Yet Socrates loved his city so much that he refused to escape. Instead, he died in quiet dignity. Centuries later, even Roman emperors were moved to tears by his story. So, what's the topic here? Do we have a proposition? Not really. This is a little bit more narrative than the other two examples here. But I think I know what the topic is. We got Socrates, Socrates, Socrates popping up all over the place. Let's go ahead and look at some quiz questions now. The main subject of the essay is big picture question, and this one should be really obvious to you. It's going to be the life of Socrates. And we figure that out just by finding the topic. We know it can't be who influenced Roman emperors because that was the very last sentence, and that was the first time we ever heard about the Roman empires. We know that Plato was mentioned as the author, but Plato was never mentioned again. He was only mentioned once. Athens was definitely important here, but it was only important because of the life of Socrates. Number 2. The author mentions Roman emperors in the last line in order to. This is a rhetorical purpose question, and we're going to kind of determine why the author thought that mentioning Roman emperors was important. Why? Well, let's look at some options. Are we transitioning into the next paragraph? You know what? I don't know what comes next in this essay, but maybe that's correct. Maybe the author is going to be talking about the life of Roman emperors next. To illustrate who condemned Socrates and why. Now, if we noted in our reading passage, it said that Socrates was condemned by the citizens of Athens, who were Greeks. That can't be the correct answer. To show the lasting influence of Socrates' life, I'm going to put a question mark around that one. To give an example of people who also loved Athens. What did the Roman emperors love? Well, they were moved to tears by the story of Socrates, not life in Athens. So that can't be it. Now, between these two, which one is probably the best answer? There was an important key phrase in that last sentence. It talked about centuries later, even Roman emperors were moved to tears by the story of Socrates. So I think the correct answer is C, to show the lasting influence of Socrates' life. Now, to wrap up here, here's what you got to do when you run into the short answer questions. You got to skim, don't scan. Make sure you find the topic. That's probably going to be one of the most important ones. If you can find the topic, chances are you will already be answering certain questions correctly. Watch out for the keywords because they'll help you once you get the questions, find the answers quickly. If there is a proposition, make sure you find it and find those supporting reasons. And when you're answering those questions, make sure you know what the question is. Rhetorical purpose. Is it asking the overall point of the passage? Is it a little picture passage? Are you making an inference? Figure out what kind of question it is first. And then eliminate the obvious bad answers. Then you'll be down to 2, and then that'll be easy to pick the correct answer. So, thanks for staying with this lesson, and keep using educator.com.